I'm really thrilled about meeting my guest this hour because I can honestly say, without even a trace of pretension, that he changed my life. He really did. Around about the time that I was leaving commercial radio in Ireland back in 2002, 2003, into 2004, and thinking about September the 11th and that. I saw his film, Loose Change, the film that he produced with his friends, which I think has been seen now hundreds and hundreds of millions of times by people around the world. It's an extraordinary series of films. And like I said earlier on, they did the job of the mainstream media in poking holes in the ridiculous story about the September the 11th attacks. It was terrific. And he's not just known for that. He's made films as well, like Invisible Empire as well, Fabled Enemies and Shade. He's brilliant. You can follow him on YouTube because he reports on his channel daily and sometimes several times a day. His YouTube channel is youtube.com/InfoWarrior. I recommend you follow him there and watch him, youtube.com/InfoWarrior. It's a genuine pleasure for me to welcome to the program Jason Bermuth. Jason, thanks for giving us your time, my friend. And I meant every word of that. Thank you for being you. Welcome to the program.
Well, thanks a lot for having me. I mean, that was quite the intro. I'm glad to do it. And, I'm so happy that I'm able to post now 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 times a day on my main channel with highly produced videos, breaking news, things that you're not seeing in the mainstream media, and most importantly, connections that are either being ignored or very much downplayed, even with big headline stories such as, Iran right now and, of course, the Epstein case.
You're brilliant, Jason. You've got something that, not many journalists have. You've got a memory like an elephant. And it's really important because I watch you on your channel and you're on the hop and you're interacting with people on your live chat and you recall facts and figures and dates and things that happen in history like lightning. And I'm like, wow, this guy knows his stuff, and I'm really impressed with it. So that's genuine praise. I'm thrilled to bits. And when we moved to Spain, my partner and myself in 2005, and Loose Change, we used to get DVDs of Loose Change, ones that we'd gotten, some of which we paid for, others which we just had, and we would put out there and we would show them to people and invite people around. Your films changed the lives, mate, of hundreds of millions of people. They really did. And that's absolutely wonderful. There's lots we can talk about. Let me ask you, because I've always wanted to ask you this. When you made Loose Change and the follow-up films with when information came out, so you had the second edition and the final editions, with the success of them, because hundreds and hundreds of millions of people watched them, did you think, right, this is it, this is going to blow the lid off it and it's going to change the world and they're going to have to admit that they duped us all? What were your hopes when the film was so viral?
Yeah, certainly on the run-up to the 5th anniversary of 9/11 and, just before the release of the final cut, because I came on pre-second edition. Dylan had done the first edition, which really hadn't gone viral because we didn't have the opportunity, I guess. If you look, Google Video wasn't around. YouTube was a completely different animal, if it even existed at that point. I mean, 10-minute videos, poor quality, etc. You really had to torrent. And I actually watched the original edition. And, a long story how I ended up hooking up with those guys. But I truly, I believe in the law of attraction because, I just had a passion for this stuff. So we come in, and I thought right then, after seeing the first edition, as we were making this movie, that we were going to change the world. And they were kind of looking at me like, we're going to sell a couple DVDs, et cetera, et cetera. I said, no, it's going to be so much bigger than that. And really, because of guys like you, people like you, that did what we asked, took the DVD or the digital file wherever you could find it, burned copies, handed them out to people. By the 5th anniversary, we were down there with 10,000 copies, probably more than 10,000 people. We ran out of copies of that film so quick. And Investigate 9/11 t-shirts to the point where the mainstream media couldn't even cover the 5th anniversary on the ground because we were swarming it. I was booked for I was booked for Glenn Beck that day when he was still on CNN to go up against James Meggs. And earlier in the day, Dylan and I took on James Meggs and David Dunbar of Popular Mechanics, and to this day, I still think I eviscerated them, and I got canceled on Glenn Beck later in the day. It's had a lasting impact. I wanted so much more. I believed so much more. I really thought that this was a chance to take down what I consider the cabal. You know, the more and more these news stories come out, for instance, the intelligence connections now with Epstein, the fake passport, Vicky Ward saying he had an association with Adnan Khashoggi in the 1980s. Well, hey, the 1980s, Adnan Khashoggi was running the arms through Israel. Basically, they would pick up arms from Czechoslovakia and Poland. The Israeli intelligence would get their hands on them, brokered by Khashoggi. They would ship them down to the Contras. We then would ship up cocaine and marijuana to Mena, Arkansas, Florida, and then distribute it there. And then all the funding through this would go through BCCI banking. And BCCI banking is also laundering the money for the Mujahideen and the Bin Laden network at the time. You know, this cabal really hasn't changed much. If anything, it's just evolved.
It's evolved, Jason. Talk to us then about what's happening with Jeffrey Epstein. A lot of people who followed pedophile rings and people who are convinced that at the very upper echelons of political power and industrial power, people who believe that paedophile rings are the norm, they're very excited about this. I know you met David Icke many years ago, and David was very fond of your films, Jason, and he wrote some books about Edward Heath and others, the former UK Prime Minister. So a lot of people are excited. They think that maybe that Epstein is in custody, maybe he's out on bail now, that maybe with the charges against him pending, he might spill the beans and he might blow the lid off the whole thing. Are they being a bit optimistic, people, do you think?
Well, I'll tell you what, 3 weeks ago, had you told me Jeffrey Epstein would be in a jail cell or arrested, I wouldn't have believed you, number one. Number two, the judge has kept him. And we went over the letter that Jeffrey Berman sent to them and then the judge's response. That's something I really like to do on the channel because you get these sound bites on the news. Well, we'll spend 25 minutes, reading the indictment and showing you exactly what these things are about. I don't think he's going anywhere. Now, the question is he going to roll on people? Well, if what, again, Vicky Ward is reporting on Acosta is true, when Acosta was coming in to the Trump administration as the labor secretary, he was asked why he gave Epstein this deal. And he said that he was told it was above his pay grade and that Epstein was intelligence. And quite
Jason,
frankly...
do us a favor. Sorry to interrupt you, my friend. Remind our listeners, let's not... You've got a big, massive brain on you. I love this. Let's not assume knowledge because some of our listeners won't know some of this. Sure. So talk about the deal that Acosta gave to Jeffrey Epstein before becoming Labour Secretary.
So what I would advise people to do is James Patterson is a world-famous author. In fact, in this country, he's the best-selling author in the world, surpasses Stephen King. And he's normally writing fictional novels. Well, he happened to live in Palm Beach where this scandal broke out, where initially a girl who was 14 years old blew the whistle on what would become this ring of Jeffrey Epstein, his main procurer, Ghislaine Maxwell, and others recruiting young girls basically to be molested and then recruit other young girls. 30-plus victims come forward. Everybody assumes, even with this sweetheart deal, that Epstein had to plea down to this 14-year-old, and it turns out she was 16. That's a whole other issue. James Patterson wrote a nonfiction novel with 3 investigators about this case. So if you really want the nitty-gritty on the Palm Beach connections, on the Trump connections to Mar-a-Lago, which are very real, and even then he was reporting about the falling out that now... some of the witnesses, I shouldn't call them witnesses, victims, are talking about. That's where that comes from. I believe Jane Doe number 102, Jane Doe number 43, and others. So in this deal, which is just incredible, first of all, it declares not only immunity from prosecution from Epstein if he completes what's a vacation in not jail, because when he shows up to jail, he gets to leave on work release. It's now come out that he was, having sex with escorts during that time period in his quote unquote office. I mean, this deal is nightmarish. Then all of his associates get immunity for crimes that they are not even able to talk about. Well, the vast majority of these documents are sealed for years. And then in the subsequent lawsuits, those documents are also sealed. So recently we had a judge say in just one of those cases that they'd be unsealing about 2,000 pages. This was about a week prior, not even, I think a few days prior to Epstein finally getting picked up on totally separate charges, by the way, from Florida. Okay? And these stem from New York 2002, I believe, to 2005 and that operation. But you got to understand, this guy had properties in New Mexico, in New York, in San Antonio, in Florida. He was coming back from France, in London, you name it. This is an international op. And, you know, we could go on about the bizarre nature of this whole thing, but just through those documents being unsealed, I think it's going to start unravel.